That means we're on. Good morning, fellas. Good to see you all again. Good to be here. And to start the morning with laughter, that's a great way to do it. So greetings to all. We're continuing our study, as you are well aware, in the Gospel of John. This morning, we're going to move ahead and look at chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. And just to kind of refresh our mind from last time, we looked at the leaders, and fellas, this whole thing with the wheel and the model and all that was developed just so I can understand what it is. A way, it's an illustration of understanding the disconnect between what we see happening between Jesus and primarily whoever he's talking with. And it just identifies in a graphic sense a motivation of the why. In this case, for sake of illustration, the leaders of the temple are operating from their power, untransformed power layer, meaning they are feeling threatened, either aware or unaware, that Jesus is a threat, and it really bugs them. And that's where the disconnect takes place. And the reality is they have created all of this in their heads, and that is what the model is depicting. When they're layer 3, in this case, it goes unsatisfied. They feel a loss. They feel a threatening to their power, meaning that's what I mean by unsatisfied. They're responding like this. And we saw this last week. They attack the personhood of this man. This man has just been healed. My goodness, we think, get a grip, guys. This man was blind and now he sees, and they just can't see beyond their own biases. Well, in some respect, it makes us scratch our heads, and boy, and on the other hand, I fully identify with this, and I have been in this same situation, not this same situation, but a situation like this. And what I often tend to do is go on the offensive and start attacking. And that's what they do. They attack his personhood, saying that he was born in sins. Then number 2, they bolster their self-constructed importance. The fragile, ungenerated, untransformed self, this is all we have. All we have is the self we have created. So in order to feel better about ourselves, we have to construct our own importance. And they say, and yet you are teaching us. They view themselves as on the top of the mountain, king of the mountain, and that's how they see it, and that's how they see it. And then the third thing is they punish the perceived dissenter, which is in this case the man who had been born blind. And so they do what all that is in their power, they kick him out. They do what us humans do, is separate, kick him out. And boy, we just walk away again, scratching our heads. In verse 35, we continue after the man is kicked out, and we see Jesus hearing that they had put him out, verse 35. And upon finding him, Jesus searches this man out, and he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" In verse 36, he answered, the man who had been born blind. He answered by saying, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him." It's so interesting, of the nuances and the interplay with the idea of sight. We see it so many times in this text. You've seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you. Verse 38, he said, "I believe, Lord," and he worshiped him. So that's what we'll look at this morning. Verse 35a is the underlined portion, the first half of the verse, and it's subheaded Jesus Seeks, or entitled Jesus Seeks. And I really like this idea. Upon hearing that the man had been kicked out, Jesus exerted the effort to locate the man. I just want to pause and look at that. And rather than just passing by, Jesus accepted the news that the man had been put out, and Jesus stopped what he was doing, and he took the time to seek the man out, And I think that shows us volumes. And this is what I mean. In so doing, Jesus, who is, according to John, the Word becoming flesh, is demonstrating what God is like. God is for us. God is the seeker. God has always been for us and has always been the seeker. That is my interpretation. And this verse illustrates that. It's not a proof text. It's illustrative of the nature of God as demonstrated through the Word becoming flesh, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus is also, on the flip side, demonstrating to us what it means to be fully human. The Word becoming flesh. I cite that again. He knew what it was like to experience, even at this point in his ministry, rejection. We've seen it already several times. And the harshness of how that feels, the harshness of human rejection. This idea, he's already experiencing it. This idea of human rejection will culminate in what he calls his hour. Remember, we looked at Jesus in speaking of his mission, of how he speaks of his mission, he is from the Father, he is returning to the Father, and now in this period, in the interim, he is moving towards his hour. His hour is the culmination of rejection, that he will be experiencing rejection, which never feels good. And so here we have it in this little tucked away verse, residing in John chapter 9, and also in 100% correlation with how we've seen Jesus interact thus far. We can learn once again, it's just an illustration that God has always been a seeker. And Jesus illustrates that or enforces that. And also he is showing us what it looks like to be fully human, what we can be like as human beings. Verse 35b, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" Once he encounters the man, and the man says, well, it's at this time that Jesus asks this man the question. And this question, do you believe in the Son of Man? This question, we are far removed from that idea, from that question. But I don't think the man was. I don't think Jesus was just throwing out a religious question for this man. I think this man had in his mind an understanding of this term, Son of Man, jointly based on the Old Testament scriptures, specifically Daniel chapter 7 that we'll look at. And it is a technical term that this man would have known. And so therefore, he's not trying to confuse the man, he's trying to engage the man into a conversation. This man, along with the general population of his day, at least the Jewish portion, I would probably put it broader than that. The Jewish segment had it more defined, but I would think it would be generally true that the people of the time were anticipating one to come. There was one to come, and we read it over and over in the Gospels. There's this hope that someone was going to come to save the people from their commonly shared human angst, anxiety, just turmoil that they're in. And I think that was the general thought on the street. Things were not good. The various nuance in belief of this idea, and there were several, is secondary in relation to the commonly held hope for future. And in their way of thinking in the New Testament, this is what the term salvation meant. We have, at 2,000 years removed, we have turned it into something else and added to that. But when they talk about salvation, they're talking primarily about deliverance from the immediate situation. Sometimes there's an attachment of a future judgment, at least in the Gospels. But this is what they're talking about, is this deliverance from this turmoil and this rule that they are under. This one who is to come, is to save, is commonly recognized in the term Son of Man. Both Jesus and the man share this common understanding. And then I'm quoting out of, this is out of Daniel 7. We've looked at this. And here's the quote that, you know, a nice Jewish person going to synagogue week after week, as they read through the Old Testament, they would come up with this. And this would have been talked about many times in a person's lifetime. I kept looking, Daniel in his vision, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days, which represents, at least from my perspective, the throne of God in a illustrative sense. And he was presented before him. This Son of Man is now into the very presence of God Almighty. And to him, the Son of Man, was given dominion, honor, and a kingdom, so that all the peoples, nations, and populations of all languages might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. It's a different kind of dominion, which has the definitive note of everlasting. It will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. It's emphasizing the eternality of the kingdom that is going to be inaugurated through this term, Son of Man. And so Jesus asked, 35, do you believe in the Son of Man? This future hope of salvation through the Son of Man consisted of at least two components. So in his mind, at least two, there could be more, but it was the idea of release from turmoil, immediate turmoil, and it was the idea of future judgment, a judgment towards the perpetrator, those responsible for their own turmoil. And those two coupled together in the general term, Son of Man, was to make all things right. Different approaches on who this would be and how he would look, and this person, but basically Son of Man is identified with a deliverance of through an everlasting kingdom. And that, of course, provided hope. And here's one of my notes. The kingdom has always existed. You know, it wasn't invented through Jesus. It has always been through God. God hasn't changed. And however, it is the incarnation that is so central here in the book and so important to our belief. It's the incarnation. It is the Jesus event. It is his birth. It is his life. It is his arrest, his death, his resurrection, his ascension. It's the entirety of the incarnation event. And that incarnation is embodied within the person of Jesus of Nazareth, fully human. God becomes flesh. It is his reign which saves. His reign began at the time, his reign came with the person of Jesus. Thus, all of humanity, they reference their life in him, this one who is the Son of Man. This is a really big deal. So as an example, Jesus, I wanted to, before we move on, I wanted to look at one other example, the amazing truth, emphasizing the amazing truth as portrayed in John's gospel is that this commonly shared future hope is brought into the present through the incarnation. It's just an illustration of what I just said. The life of Jesus of Nazareth. It's just his life that in which there is salvation. And then see example below. And I pulled out of John's gospel this dialogue between the woman at the well and Jesus. And she is an outside of the Jewish fold. She's a Samaritan woman, but yet she holds this belief of one to come. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming. This, she calls it Messiah, this one. He is called Christ. When that one comes, he will declare all things to us. And then Jesus said to her, I am he, and the one speaking to you. He is the one. Of course, you guys know all that, but it's ingrained within this gospel account. Therefore, when Jesus asks this man, do you believe in the Son of Man? All that background to say, he's asking if the man believes that God will act in some way to make all things right. Is God in the picture? And the man, his response, 9:36, he says, he answered by saying, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? He's ready for belief. And what I want to show here is this progression within this man's belief. Belief is a journey, much more of a journey than a light bulb coming on. I guess there's a combination of both, but this man has been on this journey of belief for quite some time. First, we see him acknowledging Jesus as the healer in verse 11. And there's the quote. And then we see he identifies Jesus as a prophet. And that was in a very positive word to identify Jesus with, a prophet, one who speaks on behalf of God. And that would be a very general sense of what a prophet meant. That's verse 17, verse 11, verse 17. He's on this journey of belief. He identified Jesus then as a miracle worker in verses 30 through 33. And there's the quote. So there's a progression of acceptance in this man's life. And now he's standing before this man, and this man's quite aware of his own, what has happened to him. He was blind and now he sees. And he's very aware of who made it possible. And it says he received his sight. This is just a commentary. And this is the kicker. He received his sight through receiving from Jesus. It's over and over again, we see the reception of Jesus as the means by which people move along in their in their belief, in their life, moving towards a freedom. As a result, this man, he sees reality in the physical sense. His eyes are opened and he sees. But yet, I quoted it again, he really sees. Because over and over again, we see what is so common amongst us humans. You and I have the ability to see. We're seeing right now. The leaders in this text have the ability to see, but actually they are operating out of blindness, as we're going to see. And I read this and I go, well, how can that be? Well, I've experienced it. There are many times in my life where my judgments, and primarily because I become too quick on the trigger, I see, but I really don't see. And I think that is the major disconnect. There's something driving me that blocks me from not seeing at that moment. And in my thinking, I've identified it as these various layers in a, to illustrate it. So verse 37, Jesus said to him, you have both seen him. There he is. And he is the one who is talking with you. And he said, I believe, Lord. And he worshiped him. The man exemplifies what it looks like to us to be receptive. He's all about receptivity. Somebody mentioned last week on this Zoom about the humility. What was involved with this man of believing the words of Jesus to receive the mud and then to go wash it in the pool of Siloam? That in itself was an act of faith. Because he is receptive to Jesus, he's able to receive from Jesus. Because he's able to receive from Jesus, he is now able to clearly see all things as they truly exist. This is the definitive truth of receptivity from Jesus. So therefore, if I am not seeing clearly, if I find myself not seeing clearly, which has often been the case, then I am not, even though I think I'm not being receptive at that moment to what Jesus is granting me. And most often I find myself in a position of pride, of bolstering self, operating at a untransformed position because of my own ego, my own needs, my own fears, my own doubts, and I am not at that moment able to receive. That's what we're talking. That's how I see it. Worship then is the natural outcome of such an experience. This man was blind and now he sees, and of course we would expect him to worship the Lord, the Lord Jesus, as we see in verse 38. I think it's interesting to note, remember the cry of the leaders back in verse 24, give glory to God. They wanted the man, they were trying to manipulate the man in a puppeted religious response and give glory to God as if it mattered. And it's so interesting here how he gives glory to God, but it is nothing in comparison like the religious leaders wanted him to do. The very fact of how just how confusing this whole thing can become in a leader's head is just mind-boggling. And here are the outcomes. Now I backed off just a second here, and just to remind us that when John wrote this from the island of Patmos late in his life, he was writing to real people in real, at a real time in history. And at that time in history, people were coming to faith, and there would have been a lot of the same kind of disconnect and confusion and rejection that this man's story depicts. It would have happened to numerous people as they come to a place of faith in Jesus as the Messiah. And so there are two things that the first century church would have derived from this story. Number one, you may get kicked out, but you're not alone, as we see depicted here. This idea of getting kicked out. Number two is that if you do get kicked out, your sense of security lies in something much larger and much more secure and is truly real. They can't take that away from you. They just can't take the reality of faith and faith in Christ from you, even though you're kicked out. I think that would have been how the first century church would have looked at this, as a word of hope from chapter 9. Now in our table time, here is what I'd like to do, is really piggyback on this idea of rejection. You know, some of us on this call in this Bible study have experienced rejection. Maybe some of us have also been perpetrators of rejection. You know, that I don't know. But I think rejection is by another human being is really part of our human experience. And either being rejected by those we love, those we respect, we trust, and or we have no ill will towards, you know, out of left field. Rejection is part of life. And the reality is life is hard. It's not fair. It's just not fair. And the reality, secondly, is rejection always hurts. You know, we can say sticks and stones may break my bones, but that is just not, it's not true, because it always hurts to be rejected by another human being. And so what I'd like us to do is talk about this from your own experience. How have you worked through this feeling of rejection? How are you working through it, if it's something you're going through right now? But let's talk about what it's like to be human and to experience rejection. And let's just tell some stories of around this idea. I know that many of you've really taken some bold moves in your faith and in life. And we've got, you know, I know we have stories to tell. So what is it like working with this idea, this feeling of rejection?
Not exactly rejection, but as like I talked one time about how the demise of the Bible stores kind of opened up the Amazon. So now you can get same books, but other books too, which walk on the edges and ask questions. And I find myself finding pieces of bits of wisdom from authors who I don't totally agree with, but I agree, but you get there's stuff in there that's really helpful. And so when you mention something, I got this idea, that where'd you get it? So, well, this came from Richard Rohr or Rob Bell or something like that. A lot of people look at that and just red flags go up all over the place. Well, then that's bad. Don't even bother talking to me about that. And of course I back way off, but that's sort of like, no, this is important. Let's talk about this, you know? And I found that
it's courage. Yeah.
I found that place a lot of times at Everyday Joe's for sure. And in this group too, because there's some interesting subjects that we need to wrestle with that sometimes we never really take a close look at. Is why is this true? How is this true? How does this make sense?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the times that people are protected because they realize sometimes the questions can cause the argument to collapse. So it's interesting to open up other authors who have already dared to do this and then have to use them as a point of discussion.
Have you ever found thank you, that is really pertains to this. I'd like to know from you, and I'll comment on it. Have you ever found yourself in a place of having an idea to express, but you withhold because of fear? I mean, there's other ways to withhold.
No,
because of fear of rejection.
Yeah. Outside of being really wrapped up in a tight little cult like Jehovah's Witnesses or the Way or something, I don't live in that kind of culture here. We can go from one church to another. Now that creates a certain sense of church shopping, which also I can decry, but at least you don't get in a situation that you're trapped.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Mike, I think when you say rejection always hurts, when you're rejected by the world, you know, that's an expected rejection. When your beliefs are challenged or rejected by the world,
Yeah.
that's expected. So it doesn't quite hurt as bad. It's when, and I think Bill was alluding to this, that when we get into this, you don't believe the way I believe kind of discussion
Yeah.
amongst believers, that means that your beliefs are invalid. That kind of rejection is the kind that hurts the worst, is when
Yeah,
we get a division or a separation or a rift
Yeah.
amongst the body of believers over minuscule periphery.
Yeah.
But it's because you don't believe how I believe. Oh, you guys don't baptize how we baptize. You don't take communion how we take communion. So you're wrong. And that that is the kind of rejection I think that hurts more than being rejected by the world.
Yeah. I remember on that point that I think so, Jeff, exactly. I remember hearing Rob Bell speak at a conference after he wrote the book Love Wins, which, by the way, I read that book word for word. I mean, I read it all the way through and I go, my goodness, he got rejected for this. I just, I thought it was a well-written book myself. I mean, that's my perspective. That's a controversy. I don't mean that to be controversial, but anyway, he was talking about the emotional pain that he went through from his peers, because he was this very stalwart. I mean, he's got these Numos videos that are amazing, great, wonderful teacher. And he talked about how he was so distraught one day over this whole idea of what was happening to him through publishing this book. And people were firing cannons at him, people he respected, people he loved, people who were peers, and they were crucifying the guy. And he talked about driving into a gas station somewhere where he lives, and he was so distraught, he put gas in his car and his mind was elsewhere, and he drove away with the with the spout in the tank, because he just was so, he was just saying it was so hard to go through all that. And pretty much he's left. I don't see Rob Bell involved in the organized church today. I think he's taken his message elsewhere.
Today?
He's Eastern Orthodox now.
Oh, he is. Okay, so
He's out of the stuff that you generally view, which is Rome kind of stuff.
I have a friend in Colorado Springs that I go way back with. Steve, part of our background together, and he's an author, and he's taken, he just doesn't, he's not involved in the organized church, just because he's experienced so much pain through the people that are supposed to be on the same team. It's really sad.
I was shocked to find out, in my naivete, I started going to churches, and not to be disrespectful, I didn't realize that it was as fraternal as it really is in function. So I would just pick a church, and I would go in, and I'd pick a Baptist church, and I'd go there, and there were some things that I didn't agree with, from my knowledge of scripture, my perspective. And the people would say, well, Vince, we're Baptists. This is what Baptists do. If you don't do what Baptists do, you're in the wrong church. And then you would go to a Pentecostal church, and you would see people doing stuff, moved by the Spirit, and scarves and dancing and trumpets and things. And you go, I don't do any of that. Well, it's because you're not Pentecostal. You're in the wrong church. It's like we're the Knights of Columbus. I mean, what are you doing here if you're not a Knight of Columbus?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that.
Man.
I didn't realize that it was almost as simplistic as we've got a lot of different clubs who follow different doctrines find the one that you agree with, go to that club, and you'll have no dissent.
Yeah.
But if you walk into the wrong club, you're going to be fighting all the time, because that's not what we do in this club.
Yeah.
We have our creed. You disagree with it, you're in the wrong place. We're not changing. We bought the building. It took a long time to get over that.
I was listening to a podcast somewhere, and they were dealing with people who are coming to a realization that the church they're in, and of course this has all been driven primarily politically,
Yeah.
that they can't be there anymore. They can't agree with even some of the music, let alone the sermons and stuff. And they said, what do we do and where do we go? And it was an interesting comment. The guy said, well, until you find another church that fits you, he says, a good place to go is to find a liturgical church. Now, they stop short of Catholic, because Catholic has certain requirements, but it could be Anglican, Episcopalian, even some Lutherans. Because go to a liturgical church, take part in the communions, and listen to their short homilies, which are generally not political, and just let yourself be in community and heal. And I thought that was an interesting piece of advice. Is get out of the political churches, get to a place where they have communion and they have a body, and let yourself rest. I thought that was, I don't know if I agree with it.
Yeah, I think
advice.
That's good advice, and it really is aligned. I didn't know Rob Bell is on the Eastern Orthodox, but what I do know about the Orthodox belief is it's exactly that. It's much more participative and enfolding with the body in profound ways, and so it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I can promote something here. I think I'm trying to remember his name now. They have a St. Thomas Anglican church here now that meets at the senior center, but the guy that works there is oh gosh, I can't remember, one of the nicest guys I ever met. He used to meet at Timberline Old Town, and he went out. He's from here. Went out, got his Anglican priesthood, if you will, and came back, and he really likes it because they were so they stayed outside the political battle. And I can see the desire to go there.
Yeah. Yeah. Other comments? We're talking about rejection, or we've landed on primarily being rejected by, people who have gone out. Some would call it a growth. Some would call it a going down the tubes, whatever one's perception is. But actually believing things differently than they did at one time and being rejected, that's a really hard pill to swallow. That really is hard on us, and there's different reactions in that. Case in point, we see Jesus as coming into a primarily religious community, a Jewish community, as a young Jewish man, and primarily being rejected from those superiors within that community. It's nothing new. It's what he experienced. And it's part of life. It's really unfair, but it certainly is the way it is. So what has been some of the rest of you, what has been some your experiences around this subject of rejection?
So Mike, this was your question. How about you sharing with us what has been some of your experiences with rejection?
Oh, well, of course, I always like to, I will do that, John. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but, I trying to not talk so much. I talk too much anyway, but I find myself, personally, fear of rejection. I think my first response is that I think as a young man, I was a perpetrator of rejection. And Steve Shinnig would know a lot of my former probably not a lot of the details, but a lot of my own self-righteous way of thinking in the early days of our common brethren experience. I was just, I was confused. I was young, I was prideful. And in a sense, I actually separated myself from the people I loved. I mean, our fellowship at the Brethren Assembly, Steve, was a wonderful thing. But I had it in my head that we needed to do something. And if you would have asked me what it was, I wouldn't have known what it was. But I think I caused a lot of problems within that church. And I feel really bad about that. But it was unavoidable. It was, I think part of my objection was true, but most of it in my attitude was not true. It was out of a untransformed way, self-righteous way of thinking. So, John, when you asked me that question, I think that my, my sense of rejection comes primarily from the other side. I view myself more like a Pharisee and a self-righteous young person. Versus the other. Another feeling is I also felt I treated my dad poorly from a self-righteous religious perspective. And fortunately, as he grew older, we were able to actually have a lot of talks about this, and really a lot of healing took place. And I'm very grateful for that. But and it's interesting now that I'm at this age, I'm experienced rejection from some of my, how I perceive it as rejection from some of my loved ones. I don't think it's a curse on me, but I think it's part of being human and what it feels like to someone you love and you care for, but yet you feel a disconnect. And it just, John, it just doesn't feel good. It's a grief. It creates a grief in me that sometimes results in anger. And, oh Lord, do I keep trying? It's not perfect. So I've experienced both. I've often thought, gee, what I did as young man's coming around to hurt me. And I pull that one out of my head because I don't think God is trying to teach, there you go. You get what you, sometimes we do get it, but I don't think I'm being cursed. But I have experienced both sides. I entered life as a young man as being a perpetrator of rejection. But I've experienced both sides. Primarily, I have experienced it in business. Humbling 10 years of being in deep financial doo-doo and going to the bank. I felt like a 12-year-old kid with an allowance, and it really did a great thing on my pride. It just broke it. Well, no, I'm not broken yet. I'm in process, but that was an extremely humiliating process I went through for probably, well, it was 7 years because it was a 7-year loan I had to pay back. And it was every month had to go in and meet before the board, the bank, and give a report, just like a book report. And, but the upside of that, John, I'll never look at a struggling business person the same again. There is an upside, and I wouldn't trade it. And I don't think everybody has to go through that, but I did. I think in my genes is a self-righteous, I would have been a good Pharisee, I think. So,
well, Mike, going back to our shared history, we were sort of raised on the belief that you could arrive at sort of the one correct way.
Yeah.
In terms of your practice, I'll call it, of Christianity, and how it was expressed, or how your evangelicalism was expressed. And I just want to say that because, you know, we both of us share I guess in a sense, we share some blame there, but on the other hand, we also were sort of, that was what we were taught.
Yeah, that's true.
In the years of, I'll call it, youthful idealism. And
Yeah.
and I'll give you grace there. I'll give myself
Thank you.
grace.
Thanks for the grace.
You know, it's an interesting thing to me how this plays out as we wrestle with and search, I'll just call it, for truth. And I'm not talking about wrestling with, so to speak, some of the peripheral aspects of how our faith is expressed, but how, you know, the kind of things we've been wrestling with here on Wednesday mornings, and the kind of things that Rob Bell, for instance, wrestled with. And you end up, you know, we draw the line in different places as to where we react sort of in the Pharisaical way, so to speak, and where we just go, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? And in the process of trying to determine that for ourselves, we end up rejecting others, and we are rejected ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and in a sense, I guess part of it for me, it drives me back to, you know, a longing that was there at the time of Jesus. We want the Son of Man to come and settle all these things, and it's not just settling what color the carpet's going to be in the fellowship hall. It's settling some of these things that we're doing our best to figure out right now as to what's truth, what's not truth, and so on. You know what I'm saying? I don't really know how to express it. But,
Well, thanks for your grace. I did hear grace. Thank you, brother.
okay.
Appreciate
I'll
that.
need it.
Yeah, I've got to say to all of you, Mike, that this is a wonderful, safe place. And if we act around, a lot of us have been in different churches over the last 30 years, and we're all still here. And no one's been kicked out. People have left.
Yeah.
But it's a very safe place to explore this stuff, because I think all of us know we're trying to follow Jesus, and we respect that. So just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. Yeah.
I was amazed to find out, having had the bulk of my Christian life was with the Way Ministry, and having after the fact found out that it was considered a cult by a lot of folks. For the longest time, I kept it kind of a secret, that when people say, what church did you go to? What college did you graduate from? Do you have a degree in this? And, you know, and I would, you know, one day I would just say, well, it was the Way Ministry. And guys would be like, I never heard of it. And I'm like, I'm carrying this burden of guilt around that is known only to me.
Yeah.
Most of the world never heard of the darn place. You know, that anything that I thought they would think disparagingly of me because of it, they don't even know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's like saying, you know, I'm a Catholic. Oh, I don't know what they do, but welcome. You know,
Yeah.
It didn't really mean anything to anybody but to me.
Yeah.
And what I thought people thought about it. And so you're carrying, you know, for myself, I was carrying around a weight that need not be carried, and separating myself from people for no reason.
Yeah.
They didn't care one way or another.
Yeah.
You know, I remember that verse near the end of Acts where Paul ends up in Rome, and he starts defending himself in front of, if you heard about me, and they all looked at him and says, we haven't heard anything about you. He didn't need to, he didn't even need to bring it up.
That's really interesting. I think we're all, Vince, I think we're all prone to that kind of naturally self-centered, that everybody around knows about me. They don't care.
You think people have bad thoughts about you. They don't think about you at all.
Right.
You know,
That's the truth.
there's no evil thoughts. There's no thoughts. I got my own issues.
Got enough to deal with.
Hey, Tatsi, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just saying that, you guys heard my story about my racial inferiority complex and being prejudiced because of my race. But what I want to say is that even after I was saved, I had this, it would always come back to me in the sense of that rejection always drove me into being very works oriented. So even after I came to the Lord, I kind of relapsed back into that. And being a scientist and being in the scientific field where your works is what determines your reputation and where you stand in the field. And so when I postdoc with a very prominent molecular biologist at Princeton who was Japanese. So that would kind of compensate for, like, okay, now I'm working in science where I'm not going to be rejected because I'm Japanese. In fact, when I went to Cornell, you always used to think, well, you should be a great student. You're Japanese, right? Well, I was a terrible student. Okay. Yeah. So my works was actually being on the crew and being a coxswain of a crew that was a national champion. Okay. That to me was the biggest works thing that I did in college. Okay. So anyway, I still run into that type of thing. And I think it comes from my basic sense of being rejected, and I need to do works, even in my spiritual journey, that will determine, whether I am a good Christian or a bad Christian or whatever kind of a thing. Yeah. And it kind of relates to when Vince was talking about, being thought of as, for being a Catholic. The thing that knocked that out of me was when I heard Brennan Manning give a talk in Honolulu, which showed me, like, man, this guy, he's a Catholic, a practicing Catholic, but he's the most born again, spiritual, faithful guy that I've ever experienced. And, and his writings show that too. So anyway, that's what my
Don't let that get around.
Yeah.
Ruin his reputation.
Tatsi, we know of you and your reputation, and we respect that, but we don't know anything about it. So you're safe here. We don't know if your last paper was accepted or rejected or whatever. We're too stupid for that.
We got just a couple minutes left, and thank you guys for sharing what you did. And but what I want to end on the note of the heart of God here. Boy, the heart of God, as demonstrated through the incarnate Jesus, the God in flesh, is to seek out those who have been rejected. And I think we see a little example here tucked away in John's Gospel, chapter 9, of Jesus stopping his very important schedule and taking time to seek this man out. And I think it was with the intent, I want to believe it was for the intent of not getting him through to close a deal. I don't think Jesus is attempting to close a deal. Jesus is attempting to empathize with this man's pain. And John capitalizes that to the early church. And that is really spoken loudly to me, that the heart of the Father, as demonstrated through the Son, is for those people, in this case, who have suffered rejection, and to just go and identify with them. So I think I'll leave that with you. And I won't get the last word then. Bill, go ahead.
You're muted.
You're muted, unmute.
That was an okay sign, not,
Okay, all righty. Oh, you're waving, okay. Well, you guys have a good few weeks together and I'll be back with you on the 18th. And good being with you this morning. And have a good week. See you now.
Amen.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your words, Steve.
You're welcome.